Before we have our last speaker, I'd like to say thank you to a couple of people who worked so hard personally to put this together. Karina Courtwright and Betsy Stang, could you please stand up so people can see your face? And I'm sure, Karina, your mother would be very proud of you. And personally, I thank you for the honor for inviting me here to do this for you. But I also want your indulgence just for a few minutes. There's a lady who was my spiritual mother, and she's here with us today, and I want to acknowledge her. She's Elizabeth McKenzie from Ray Edzo from the Dog Rib Nation. Elizabeth, could you please stand up so people know who you are? Her and a delegation of 4 people have come all the way from the Arctic to be with us, to give us support today. And on that note, I'd like to thank all the elders and the youth who have come here to be with us. And I pray that each and every one of us have found a space in their heart to take the messages from here home to share with all of the children of the earth. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Ibrahima Fall, Ambassador, the Assistant Secretary General for the Human Rights for the UN.
Distinguished representative of member states, distinguished representative of indigenous nations and organizations, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I am deeply honored today to be sharing this forum with you, honorable spiritual elders of North America. Thank you. I am deeply honored today to be sharing this forum with you, honorable spiritual elders of North American indigenous peoples, the Algonquin, the Mi-kmaq, the Huichol, the Maya, the Hopi, the Iroquois, and the Lakota. We have gathered in this House of the United Nations to hear the indigenous elders relay their prophecies and describe their visions, because we are all united by a common concern and a common aspiration: how to save our earth, how to build again the ancient bridge of harmony between the human race and the environment, how to ensure the respect for human dignity and fundamental human rights. We all know that human rights and the environment are very closely linked. All too often have we heard about grave damage to health and the threat or loss of life, not only of individuals, but of whole communities, because of environmental degradation. Indigenous peoples have mourned all too many victims from such man-made disasters and have been calling on the world to pause and remember that humanity is an integral part of nature, and that we must live and work in this world with respect rather than seek to dominate the earth. An ancient Amazonian proverb brings this message to the 20th century in these words: treat the earth well. It was not given to you by our parents. It was loaned to you by your children. Hopefully, through the years, the voice of the indigenous peoples at the United Nations has been growing louder and clearer, and United Nations action for the dignity and the human right of indigenous peoples has culminated in significant succession. From 1917, when North American indigenous leaders traveled to the League of Nations to plead their cause, to the 1970s, when the indigenous movement organized the first international indigenous meeting, to 1982, when the United Nations created the Working Group on Indigenous Peoples, we have come a long way. The Working Group on Indigenous Peoples has developed into a unique forum where indigenous representatives fully participate and voice their concerns and aspirations for the future. Through the years, at the Working Group, we have been privileged to witness many expressions of indigenous values and spirituality, often spoken to us in the indigenous languages. In 1990, the Secretary General of the United Nations received an indigenous leader for the first time. It was David Copenhaver Yanomami from Brazil. And it is hopeful that 3 years after, 1993 was proclaimed by the United Nations as the International Year of the World Indigenous People. And yet, today, not only is International Year a reality, but the United Nations is proud to have appointed Rigoberta Menchú, the acclaimed indigenous leader and human rights fighter from Guatemala, as the Goodwill Ambassador for the year. The year which is soon drawing to an end and which is expected to pave the way for a decade of indigenous peoples, has oriented our work around two basic aims. The first is to raise awareness worldwide about the situation and aspirations of indigenous peoples. The second aim is to integrate indigenous concerns in the operation of the United Nations system with full indigenous participation in projects which may affect indigenous communities. In this framework, I am glad to announce to the elders that the Working Group on Indigenous Populations has recently completed an important part of its work. The draft declaration on the right of the indigenous peoples it has just adopted recognizes, among others, the right of indigenous peoples to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual and material relationship with the land, territories, waters, and coastal seas and other resources which they have traditionally owned or otherwise occupied or used, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in their regards. The draft declaration also recognizes the right of indigenous peoples to practice and revitalize their cultural traditions and customs, the right to manifest, practice, display, and teach their spiritual and religious traditions, customs, and ceremonies, and the right to revitalize, use, develop, and transmit to future generations their histories, languages, oral traditions, philosophies, writing systems, and literatures. Working Group on Indigenous Population, Rio Conference on Environment and Development, Vienna World Conference on Human Rights. Through this historic process, the world has learned to respect and listen to the wisdom of indigenous peoples and to recognize their unique contribution to civilization. This is a beginning, and we must continue. Once again, dear elders, I wish to express my deep gratitude to you, spiritual elders of North America, for having shared with us your traditional prophecies and visions about the environmental and ethical crisis confronting humanity now. In this House of Nations today, you have renewed our inspiration and our hope for a future which will respect the environment and the dignity of all. Let me assure you that the door of the United Nations is and will remain open for indigenous peoples. Thank you.
We thank you for extending a hand to us. We thank the United Nations for letting us believe this is a house of hope and a house of peace. And before we all stand for a prayer, I just want to tell you, and the people who were here this morning, this drum, which is a children's drum, is a Dene drum that was made by a man named John Kenny-Gilday from a small, isolated village called Dene on Great Bear Lake in Northwest Territories. It's a drum that has the witness signatures of all the delegation that are here, and it will be presented to the Secretary General to keep in this house of hope and peace for all children of the world to see as a symbol of what people have said here today. And now will you please stand for the closing prayer.
The sacred drum is a symbol of the heartbeat of our nation. Also, it symbolizes the heartbeat of our Mother Earth, a heart that beats within us all. Also, from the Lakota, in behalf of other indigenous nations that are here, we want to present this also with this drum, so that 500 years from now, you will know that these things shall come true, and that the elders had come here and warned you about these things. The eagle bone whistle, a very sacred being who we believe is a messenger from the great creator to this here, to this planet, not only of the two-legged, but all that lives within this world. This is the cry of our people. Bitaku Oyase, all my relations.
At the conclusion of the conference, a representative from each of the 7 indigenous delegations was invited to meet with the Secretary General, Mr. Boutros Ghali. They expressed the need to establish a seat in the General Assembly for the indigenous peoples of the world. He responded by assuring the delegates that their request will be put before the body. The minutes of this private meeting have been put into the official record of the United Nations.
The meeting between the two important men, that was mine.